Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper, and these are the headlines of the hour. President Joe Biden is expected to order the release of about $7 billion of the Afghan central bank's assets that are frozen in the American funding system to pay for humanitarian relief in Afghanistan and compensate victims of the September the 11th, 2001 attacks.
As we said before, we're in a window when an invasion could begin at any time.
That's the US president's warning to American citizens, but Ukraine plays down the threat, stressing it was not a sign of an imminent Russian invasion. Kremlin cites a geographical gaffe by British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss as an example of how poorly informed Western leaders are about the subject matter in the East-West standoff over Ukraine.
Fundamentally, a war in Ukraine.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi says Tehran never pins hope on the ongoing talks in Vienna aimed at reviving the country's 2015 nuclear agreement with world powers. Two journalists working with the United Nations have been detained, along with several Afghan workers, the organisation's refugee agency says. Canadian truckers continue to stage a protest outside the Parliament against COVID vaccine mandates in Canada's capital, Ottawa, with central Ottawa remaining out of bounds for the last 14 days. The drumbeats of war are getting louder. In focus are more and more deployments. On one side, Russia is sending in more troops. On the other hand, NATO is trying to match its deployments. And stuck in between is Ukraine, where 10-day-long military drills are currently underway. But even while leaders hope that diplomacy will work out, the fear of an invasion continues to loom over the region. The US is urging its citizens to immediately leave the country. The State Department has issued a new advisory. They want citizens to get out of there, because if it comes down to war, the US will not deploy soldiers to Ukraine, not even to evacuate its own citizens.
What scenarios would you put American troops to rescue and get Americans out?
There's not. That's a world war. When Americans and Russians start shooting at one another, we're in a very different world than we've ever been in.
According to US intelligence, the Russian military could launch a full-scale invasion with tanks that could potentially reach Kyiv within 48 hours. So what are the US wanting? Well, they want their citizens to get out as soon as they can.
Simply put, we continue to see very troubling signs of Russian escalation, including new forces arriving at the Ukrainian border. And as we said before, we're in a window when an invasion could begin at any time. And to be clear, that includes during the Olympics. We're continuing to draw down our embassy. We will continue that process. And we've also been very clear that any American citizens who remain in Ukraine should leave now.
Meanwhile, new satellite images show increased Russian deployment. Take a look at the images that are currently on your screen. These are the new troops that Russia has moved to Belarus and also Crimea. Reports also suggest that 10,000 Russian soldiers are camping out in Crimea. Russia is currently holding joint military exercises in Belarus, as well as naval drills in the Black Sea. It's part of Moscow's surging military activity near Ukraine. Russia has not disclosed how many troops it's deployed, but Moscow says it has the right to move forces around its territories as it sees fit, insisting that they do not pose an external threat. Well, this was being touted as the week of diplomacy, but at the end of it, we're back to square one. Several Western nations launched diplomatic pushes during the course of the week, all trying to persuade Russia to back down, but Moscow has brushed them all off, yielding no concessions to French President Emmanuel Macron, who visited on Monday, and pointing out British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's gaffes during her visit. The Normandy format talks also yielded no progress. These are the four-way talks in Berlin between Russia, Ukraine, Germany and France, part of a long-standing peace process in the Ukrainian conflict. Paris said the Russian delegation had agreed to hold more talks, but Moscow has one demand. Kyiv should negotiate directly with the separatists. That's a red line which Ukraine has rejected since 2014. But while others pursued diplomacy, the UK has taken a harder stance. It's tabled sweeping new sanctions in Parliament against Russians. The sanctions will target 1. Any company or individual who benefit from or give support to the Kremlin, and 2. Russian oligarchs residing in the UK or possessing assets in British overseas territories. It's important to note that these will come into effect only if and when Russia invades Ukraine. But while the West is mostly unified when it comes to sanctions, they have conflicting views on the immediacy of the threat. The US and UK say that the invasion could come within days. Macron, on the other hand, says Russia is not planning to invade Ukraine, but still wants sweeping changes to European security arrangements. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has described talks with the West as a conversation between a mute person and a deaf person. Well, our correspondent, Trent Murray, has sent us this update from Brussels.
There had been, I suppose, high hopes in some ways about these talks because really this is the only forum right now that the Russians and Ukrainians are speaking to each other directly. It's part of what's known as the Normandy format talks. They are essentially discussions hosted by both the French and the Germans to try and find a diplomatic way through this growing crisis on the border of Ukraine. But despite the talks lasting for over 9 hours, lasting well into the late evening here, they really failed to reach any major breakthrough. Both the Ukrainian and Russian sides leaving that meeting saying they weren't even able to agree on a joint signing of a document. The Ukrainian envoy in all of this, Andrei Yermak, said that obviously without de-escalation, without the withdrawal of Russian troops from our borders, one cannot speak about calm in the situation. So it obviously remains a very tense situation overall. Diplomats across Europe working just to try and keep the two sides at least talking about some of those disagreements like the Minsk Accords and how they should be interpreted. All of this, of course, happening, though, as Russia continues to flex its military muscle. NATO saying that over 125,000 combat troops have now effectively encircled Ukraine as part of those military exercises taking place with Belarus.
That was Trent Murray in Brussels. The British Foreign Secretary's latest foray into international diplomacy has not gone as planned, especially after she received a geography lesson from her Russian counterpart at their meeting in Moscow yesterday. Russia's Kommersant newspaper has quoted two diplomatic sources to narrate what happened at the hours-long closed-door meeting in Moscow yesterday. According to the report, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss was asked to recognise 2 Russian territories which lie towards the southern part of the country. Rostov and Voronezh, these are the sovereignty where Russia is building up its troops. And the reports state that British Foreign Secretary denied to recognise these territories as Russian. Then she was corrected by her ambassador. All this happened at the meeting in Moscow yesterday. And now the Kremlin has picked up this geographical gaffe as an example to say that Western leaders are poorly informed about the Ukrainian crisis. However, the British sources have clarified that Liz Truss simply misheard Lavrov during the meeting, and they've rejected the Kremlin's characterization of the West.
Давайте надеяться до последнего, что речь идет об оговорках. Но то, что действительно ведущие, действующие лица мировой дипломатии испытывают проблемы с прочтением очень короткого и предельно четкого текста Минского комплекса мер, это очевидно.
Threats of a Russian invasion are growing near the Ukrainian border, and tensions are rising in a deserted Ukrainian town. Here's a report about what life is like in Krymsk.
Krymsk is the front line of eastern Ukraine. It is the no man's land. It is part town, part barracks. And normal life is suspended. Located between the Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists, many houses have been destroyed by the fighting and some abandoned by their owners. Roads and bridges are covered in snow. Life is not easy for residents of a conflict zone. Most rely on charity workers for fuel and medicine. There's a military field hospital in a basement. It's the sole medical facility in Krymsk. Upstairs, Lena Parhomenko runs a shop. Parhomenko is a Russian, often at loggerheads with her family back home.
I convinced them, her family in Russia, that there are Russian troops here, that things are not normal here. So they changed their minds about what was happening. They have their news, their version. We have ours. They play us against one another.
And for younger Krymsk residents, life is all about survival.
I would explain it to her this way. You live here, you survive. When they don't shoot, you feel good. But when they start shooting, you get scared, you run anywhere to hide.
Russia has massed more than 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border. And even though it denies plans to invade, fears of a worsening humanitarian crisis remain.
Well, just days after the indirect talks between Tehran and Washington resumed in Vienna, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met the German Foreign Minister in Jerusalem. The two sides discussed ways to halt Iran's nuclear program. Germany's Foreign Minister said that nuclear talks with Iran are entering a final stage, adding that despite Israeli reservations, the full restoration of the JCPOA would make the region more secure.
Die Zeit läuft derzeit gegen das JCPOA, da Iran sein Nuklearprogramm kontinuierlich weiterentwickelt hat. Das heißt, wir kommen jetzt in die finale Phase. Und dafür ist wichtig, dass Iran mit Kompromisswillen und ohne Maximalforderung, jetzt in diesem Moment werden die Gespräche ja gerade weitergeführt, an den Tisch zurückkehrt. Wir sind da voll und ganz involviert, weil wir alles dafür tun wollen, dass mit diesem Abkommen die Sicherheit Israels gewährleistet.
Israel and Iran are arch enemies. Israel has vocally objected to the US-led efforts to revive the deal. Israeli leaders have said that the country would not be bound by any agreement between world powers and Iran, leaving room for Israel's military to manoeuvre. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said that he presented Foreign Minister Baerbock with Israel's position, that a nuclear Iran endangers not only Israel, but the entire world.
Mr. Baerbock and I discussed the nuclear talks with Iran taking place in Vienna, which Germany is part of. I presented the minister with our position that the nuclear Iran endangers not only Israel, but the entire world. The E3 countries cannot also ignore the threat posed by Iran beyond its nuclear program. Iran is Hezbollah in the north, Iran is Hamas in the south. Iran is the exporter of terror from Yemen to Buenos Aires.
Well, the White House is concerned about running out of time. The US says talks with Iran have reached an urgent point, and it will be impossible to return to the deal if an agreement is not reached in the coming weeks. US President Joe Biden is in a tough spot here. Biden's facing growing concern that even if a deal is reached, it may be insufficient to curb Tehran's nuclear program. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was designed to prevent Iran from building an atomic bomb. The pact was taken on renewed urgency as Tehran improves its capabilities and the end of the talks approach. Either the JCPOA is resurrected over the next few weeks, or the Biden administration is faced with a diplomatic failure. As China continues its bid for greater leadership in global diplomacy through its Belt and Road initiative, the European Commission has announced a mega investment plan to Africa to counter China in the region. The European Union pledged a $171 billion investment in Africa as part of Europe's Global Gateway Infrastructure Initiative.
Aujourd'hui, je suis fière d'annoncer plus de 150 milliards d'euros par le programme Afrique-Europe. C'est le tout premier plan régional sous Global Gateway, 2 mois après le lancement de la stratégie. Il sera porté par l'équipe Europe et mis en œuvre en partenariat avec vous.
Europe has set a target date of 2030 for the African funds under the plan. Funds allocated will be used for boosting private and public infrastructure on the continent. Areas of investment will include renewable energy, education, boosting vaccine production and reducing risk of natural disasters. The European Union announced the investment strategy as a way to boost global recovery back in December. The Global Gateway Investment Scheme aims to invest up to $340 billion around the globe by 2027. It will draw on private sector investments as well as funding from EU member countries and institutions for that funding. American rapper and songwriter Snoop Dogg has been accused of sexual assault by an unidentified woman. The woman has accused the rapper of sexual assault and battery after she attended one of his concerts back in 2013.
The Pepsi Super Bowl halftime show.
An unidentified woman has accused American rapper Snoop Dogg of sexual assault and battery after attending one of his concerts in 2013. The lawsuit comes just days before the rapper performs at the Super Bowl halftime show near Los Angeles. The woman is allegedly a dancer, actress, and model who worked with Snoop Dogg. In the lawsuit, she alleges that the rapper entered a bathroom she was using before forcing her into oral sex and masturbating in front of her. The lawsuit further adds that she worried about losing her job if she didn't comply, given the rapper's high profile in the music industry. Representatives for Snoop Dogg did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The woman says in the lawsuit she was also sexually assaulted earlier in the evening by a Snoop Dogg employee, who is named as a defendant as well. The complaint says the parties had first tried to resolve the matter through mediation. Snoop Dogg took to Instagram on Wednesday, writing, quote, Gold digger season is here. Be careful, keep your guards up, and keep your circle small. The lawsuit, which seeks unspecified damages, said the post appeared shortly after mediation talks broke down.
Orthodox Christians in Bulgaria are observing the day of the patron saint of beekeepers. On this day, worshippers light hundreds of candles on jars of honey and pray to the saint for protection and health.
In our church, every year we have this not only tradition but a religious service for the consecration of honey for the well-being and kindness of the people who use it.
I believe in the good. I believe in what our parents taught us. I see that the world is no longer like that. Young people have different views. I believe there is something that supports people. If a person has strong faith, whatever difficulties he may have, he will cope in life. So faith is something that should always accompany our lives.
Well, all news updates aside, do you feel the load of everyday stress in your life? Do you want to have an experience where you can feel the stress slowly dissipating? Perhaps in an empty room, basked in an all-encompassing white glow, away from the hustle and bustle of reality. Well, Japan might have come up with something you'll like. We'll leave you to find out what it is as we bid you adieu for the day. Thanks for watching.
This is rice, Arab.